Just to give you a little bit of history about Pathfinder and how we got started. The charities who are involved have all done various bits of work in relation to what we would call the health response to domestic abuse, and others, wider violence against women and girls work. But if I were to say the health response, you might be thinking mental health, probably today you would be. Others would be thinking acute work within acute hospitals. Others might be thinking community-based work. So the idea of Pathfinder is to say, well, it has to be all of that, and we have to model more the range of interventions we want to see in any area that we would call the health response.
One Christmas day, I happened to be the consultant on call, and we got a woman brought in whose husband was abusive. She'd been there giving him access to their kids, and she went into labour, and he wouldn't believe her. But she eventually got brought in, couldn't get in there in time, and delivered in A&E, and got brought up, and the ambulance men hugged him and said, "Good on you, lad, congratulations, you're a dad again," and patted him on the back and left. And he was allowed in with his wife. And I put him out, and I went to the wife and said, "Do you want him in here?" And she said, "No, but if you try and keep him out, he'll cause a fuss." So I said, "Not your problem, that's mine." So I ordered him out. So he then started phoning on his mobile phone. I said, "Not allowed in the maternity unit." Switched it off for him. So then a couple of minutes later, I found him at the nursing station using our emergency phone. So I went down, put my finger on the bar and called security and had him removed. And I then discovered that he was phoning up the hospital boss's secretary, asking for my home phone number, that he was already stalking the primary school teacher. And when I spoke to the secretary, she said, "But he seems a really nice guy," and having all these long conversations. So I had to say to my boss, "You have a duty of care to me, and you need to train your staff to know that that is not appropriate." So but they're good learning experiences, and after that, it got a bit better. But we need everybody to have the confidence to be able to deal with it and to know where to get help in dealing with it if they don't know how to deal with it.
Trauma is fantastic, it's phenomenal. You can sit all day and think about your thalamus, think about the amygdala, how cortisol levels flood your system. And when they flood that system and knocks out your hypothalamus and sends you spiraling and into that sense of hypervigilance. However, understanding trauma, it is just a theory. Without having that strength-based approach and an eye always on recovery, it is not going to work. So how we work within Network is that it is a strength-based approach. We are not amplifying her deficits. We don't need to. Come and do an assessment with a woman and she will tell you all kinds of terrible, awful things that she thinks about herself, or the experiences that she has. Actually, what we want to do is create an environment where we are always amplifying what her strengths are. So a strength-based approach for us is absolutely key.
I think today has been absolutely amazing, and I've met colleagues from agencies I didn't know existed. And what I'm taking away is the breadth of expertise that exists in a very specialist field that the mainstream don't know about, and it needs to be shared. And I think the more ways that we can find of doing that, the better. So that's what I'm taking away from today.
We're a women-only team, so as far as I know, we're still the only women-only team in the country in a mental health service. Nobody thinks that's a good idea from a policy point of view. It's fine in refuges, it's fine in domestic violence, but in mental health, it's not normal for women to be on their own. What are these women up to, all on their own, without a man? There's great men who come to the house every day. There are men who love the women who come to the house. There are men who are children of the women who stay. There are men who are care coordinators who are brilliant with some of the women who stay. But for just this brief window of 2 weeks when you want to kill yourself, or you're so paranoid, or you're starving yourself because of the trauma, you're just staying somewhere where you know when you get up in the night, it is another woman you'll meet in the corridor when you go down to breakfast. And it says something. This isn't a female-only ward, a female toilet. This is a women's service. And even the language, so often people go, "Oh, I've come to talk, I work on a female ward." It's like, they're not dogs, they're people. We're women or we're men, we're not male and female, and it's very dehumanising and separating. So we have a women-only team. And we wrote the job descriptions on skills, experiences and attitudes. And lucky, this was 1995 that we were able to do this. So we still don't have to have nurses in the team or doctors in the team. It's a skills-based team, graded, so that people come from very different walks of life to come. And then they're trained in the kind of mental health world, how to work in it, how to give medication safely. But it means you're bringing a very diverse group of people together.
This is the first study, one of the first studies I did, and what we did was compare a list of all the people who come into the emergency department as a direct consequence of an assault that day. So not background domestic abuse, not prevalence within 1 year, but domestic assault as their cause of attendance. And we saw about 158 people. I then compared their names and their lists with a list that the police gave me. And my God, the information governance was hard. Getting the ethical approval to do this was really hard, but comparing all the names to see who was on the same list. And these are all the people in that year that Cambridgeshire Constabulary had as recognised domestic abuse flags. So the police deal with more domestic abuse. And the overlap, people who are at my emergency department who the police knew about, was only 14, 9%. So that tells me that even if the police were absolutely perfect at sorting out domestic abuse and they respond perfectly and they lock up perpetrators and they do everything perfectly, it ain't going to make much difference to my patients. The people on the emergency department list tend to be about 5 to 10 years younger. So that tells me that if you sort something out here and you get interventions working here, you can prevent some work here. So victims of domestic abuse presenting to an emergency department tend to be younger than those reporting it to the police. So there is a valuable intervention opportunity there that we're potentially missing.
So I think asking about domestic abuse is really important, but it is also so important to think about the environment in which you're asking people and the relationship that you have with someone when you ask them. If you can, I know it's not easy, but take time to build trust and to build a relationship with someone first, even if it's just doing something little for them, something, going out of your way to help someone or sharing some detail from your own life that people can relate to. You're asking someone to open up about something that they might never have spoken about before, and if they don't trust you, it can just make people more defensive. I think it's important to be aware of the totally different perspective that you and a victim or survivor might be coming from. What you see as their partner controlling them, they might be seeing as care and affection. And it wasn't until years later when I called the police, because Sean was threatening to kill me, and they said that was abusive, that I even began to see it like that. At the time I called them, I hadn't even kind of recognised it as coercive control. And especially things like coercive control, you don't always see when you're in it. It would have helped me if someone had told me much earlier on that what he was doing was abuse, even though he wasn't physically violent. Or if someone in the hospital had just sort of sat down and said, so tell me about your boyfriend, what's he like? But instead everything was taken out of my control.
Can I have the last word? I've worked in this field for far too long, nearly 30 years, and somebody said earlier on, it's very slow, it is very slow, but wow, we're doing some really good things. The fact that we've got GPs, we've got mental health practitioners in the room, not always agreeing, but we're here together and we're trying to work in partnership to make changes for our victims and children.
Thanks, Pathfinder. Didn't get the last word.